stayed there. Turiyananda stayed there. Sardananda stayed there. And Abhedananda at various times in the early days of Vedanta. Gitaprana is a nun of Southern California who is the minister in charge there. So if you ever want to take a beautiful retreat in upstate New York, kind of near where Woodstock was, contact her. She's going to give a talk. She's just been up in Asilomar with Swami Sarvapriyananda and Pravrajika Gitaprana and Swami Sarvadevananda. So we've been putting her to work down here. She has to give a talk tonight. She has to give a talk tomorrow in Hollywood. Everyone has to pay the piper when they're traveling. But welcome her. She's a wonderful addition to our order.
Shall I start by falling down the stairs? Oh, goody. Hardly anybody. We love it. So, is there some kind of sound check, something, or is this good? Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. I think you could hear me without that, but I know you're... All right, if you know it, please chant along. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So yeah, if you've been to the East Coast, I think you probably mostly have. You know it's almost like a different planet than here. And it's beautiful in a totally different way than this is beautiful. And it certainly is beautiful. And Ridgely is a retreat center. So it's not a regular center like even Santa Barbara or Hollywood or any of the Vedanta societies. It's set up to be a place of retreat rather than a center that has a whole lot of programs. But we have houses where people can stay overnight. And we also do day tours if you just happen to be in the area. We have a shrine room that's open all day long every day, and we live in a privileged area that we don't have to pay attention to who comes and goes in our house. And also we have 82 acres, a lot of which is walkable, and we have a lot of people who walk there, especially during the pandemic. Our neighbors have all kind of decided that that's part of their walking route. So it's quite walked. All I ask is that if you do visit us, please tell us in advance. Anything else? Yeah, and Krishna Prana is right that I kind of got shanghaied by Swami Sarvadevananda, that I kind of hoped to come to Southern California just to see friends and the sisters, but he had other ideas. And so I really am paying the piper. And I'm about to go back to New York on Tuesday. So this is a little bit like the talk that I had to give, one of the things that I had to do in Asilomar. But since I have a feeling that there's almost probably nobody here that would consider themselves never heard of anything about Vedanta before, right?
I wouldn't go that far.
Shall I assume that there is? Okay. I called this talk Fundamentals of Vedanta, but this is actually a talk that's more about thinking about spiritual practice and letting other people talk about fundamentals of Vedanta. In other words, the abstract concepts that go with teaching Vedanta, which boil down to about 2 or 3, but can add up to a lot of different kinds of arguments and lots of confusion. And so I want to talk about it in terms of one's own spiritual life. So, and it's not going to, so if you think that I'm going to talk about Advaita and Vishishta Advaita, I'm probably not. And you can find that in many good talks online. Say Swami Sarvapriyananda, who is just here, I know he has a really good talk about the fundamentals of Vedanta. So, and I'm sure just about everybody does. So if you want to know the basic structure of the concepts that drive this spiritual practice, you will find them happily online. One of the benefits of going online. But I want to talk about it more from the standpoint of someone who is trying to practice it. And I know a lot of us here have been trying to practice it for a very long time. And in doing this, I might jump around a little bit, and just bear with me. First and foremost, this is an inner search, right? A personal inner search. No matter how many external activities one might be doing, how many talks, how many concepts one might be manipulating in one's mind, it boils down to an absolute inner search. And so when we have our spiritual life, we should make sure that it isn't heavily activity weighted to the exclusion of understanding that all of the real progress, I guess you could call it, happens through this inner search and not because something happened externally. You know, we had good meditation. In fact, the very first thing I heard from any Ramakrishna Order Swami, which was Swami Swananda in Berkeley, was just this. And he was telling me, don't think that any of your spiritual practices ever lead to realization. And why? Because the divine, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, is never the effect of any cause. God is never the product of any action. Otherwise, that pretty much cancels out the understanding of the divine. So you cannot, what would you say, good karma your way into a realization. Yeah. Good, and it's not a matter of good karmic brownie points. So it's a little bit of a paradox, and that's another thing that when we approach spiritual life, in practically any tradition, we need to be comfortable with the fact that most traditions, and definitely Vedanta, speaks in paradoxes and in elliptical terms and in terms that at surface seem to be one thing, but actually probably have several deeper meanings. So not to be content to stay at the surface meaning. Say, for instance, a story that might happen in the Upanishads, like Nachiketa visiting the king of death, has many, many, many layers to it. Or even Arjuna and Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, that also has many, many layers. So always be willing to dive deeper and always understand that Vedanta, like Zen, is going to be described in language, say, for instance, longer than the longest, shorter than the shortest, standing still, it runs faster than anything. So these paradoxes, it will never, ever make rational and logical sense. And we should like that. It would, if we try and fit this all together into a perfect program, we'll be trying pretty hard, and we probably won't get very far. So elliptical language, contradictions, paradox, this is the language of the Upanishads, of the Vedanta. In Asilmar, we were calling this, I didn't name it, Vedanta 101. And I got up there and said, hey, wait a minute, there's only Vedanta 101. There is no Vedanta 102. And so meaning, in one sense, there's only one reality. That's the very basis of all Vedantic teaching. And second of all, if we think we're qualified for Vedanta 102, we might be sadly mistaken. That we better get our ego out and check it a little bit. And another reason is we should, I think, maintain a certain what Zen calls beginner mind. Because beginner mind is always open, it's always willing to move forward, it's always inquiring, never stuck in one way, always kind of not chained to any particular dogma or view, or this is how I've done things for 45 different years and I'm not changing kind of thing, when we actually need to move forward. So it's always good to keep that mind, that open mind, as if it was the first day that we walked into any Vedanta teaching. And sometimes we've been here 30, 40, 50 years, and we might be getting kind of tired of listening to people like Gitaprana. But there's always a new way to hear something. I know when Swami Sarvapriyananda first came, and there were a bunch of people in Hollywood that were basically saying, shoot me if I have to go to another Vedanta talk. And he came, and suddenly there had all of them. So it just takes a matter of seeing things in a different way. You may or may not be aware that Vedanta can be used, the word Vedanta can be used in many different ways. One is really generic, that it literally means Vedanta, and that has many different Vedas, meaning either the scriptures known as the Vedas or the inner knowledge, Veda. And Anta meaning either end, culmination, or cutting edge. And if you put those understandings together in different ways, it kind of gives you a picture that this is a bigger thing than just the end of the Vedas. And so if you look at it that way, it forms the basis of practically every Hindu spiritual thought, even if those particular lineages will say, oh no, we don't have anything to do with Vedanta. Often Vedanta still is the basis which then another set of understandings gets put on top, say, for instance, Kashmir Shaivism. It also refers to one of the 6 Hindu philosophies, the well-known ones. In that case, it's more specifically Vedanta. But even under that, there's a huge amount of difference. So there's the most extreme non-dual tradition, like Gaudapada, the Ajatavada. This is entirely unreal. It's only a product of the mind. Subjective idealism is what they call it in the West. That's Ajatavada. That's way over here on one side. And then way over on the other side, also under Vedanta, is Madhva's dualistic philosophy that says there's actually 2 realities. There's God and there's the world. And neither, we don't exactly know how it is that the 2 interact, but they're 2 separate realities running like 2 rivers side by side. So they're so absolutely different. They're both Vedanta, and there's all kinds of other nuanced philosophies and understandings in between. And I know at Ridgely, this is where we get caught up in the classes. Oh, which one? Which one? It's like, really, it doesn't matter. What's really important is that we start somewhere, not necessarily even philosophically, and make that tradition our own, however we want, we begin to. That being able to juggle philosophies and talk about them, if we love that, then that's fine. But if we don't love it, leave it. So examples of Advaita Vedanta, you probably know Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta, some of the Ramakrishna Mission. They're most well-known. Examples of qualified non-dualism are not so common in the West. That's mostly where the bhakti schools of Vedanta come from, that idea, the more personal God kind of way of looking at the infinite. And the extreme dualism over on this side, ISKCON, the Hare Krishnas, although in actuality they say they're Madhvites, but in actuality their philosophy is more akin to qualified non-dualism. So like that, there's still all these groups that are still all under the rubric Vedanta. And so that is confusing also. We don't need to worry about that. Then there's Neo-Vedanta, which is probably started by Swami Vivekananda and followed by almost every spiritual leader in India now, except the ones who are anti-Neo-Vedanta. And so Chinmaya Mission, Shivananda, what do they call it? Rishikesh Swami Shivananda, Shivananda Yoga, Sai Baba, all of them are Neo-Vedantins. In other words, they're teaching a synthesis of all paths. And I'm pretty sure Swami Vivekananda was the genesis for that. In Vedanta, and this is kind of what I want to talk about, there are three main sources of knowing. Do you know what the first one is? Yes? Yes, pratyaksha, direct experience, and which makes it very different. Most Asian traditions, that's the main source of knowing, direct personal experience. It's not like, say, for instance, some forms of Christianity where all you have to do is believe and be saved. That the idea in the East is that the divine, call it the infinite, however you want to call it, God, can be personally realized by each and every one. And so it's not a matter of congregations. It's not a matter of belonging to a certain group. It's a matter of how one's own personal spiritual life is oriented. So ideally one person could be in a family an extreme fanatical Advaitin. In other words, a non-dualist. Rejects utterly any kind of notion of God with form. And another person could be a profound bhakta, a lover of the divine in some form or another, in the same family, because it's such a personally individual tradition. When you see people going to a ceremony like a puja or going to a temple in India or even here, it's not about the congregational worship really. It's about each personal encounter, say in the temples, with the divine in the temple. They're not going there to be with a group. They're going there for darshan, to see and be seen by the deity. The next one is scripture. And here I want to remind people. So the Upanishads, and especially Sri Ramakrishna, who had a knack for making complicated teachings into absolutely beautifully understood one-liners, Sri Ramakrishna said, all language is uchishta. And uchishta means defiled. It literally means if you put something in your mouth and then you put it down back on your plate, that plate is defiled then. So what he meant by that, and the Kena Upanishad, I think, also says that, that from which all language turns back vanquished, is that the infinite, call it Brahman, which is the usual Vedantic term that is used, transcends any form of language, thought, or concept. You can't go there with your mouth. You can't even go there with your mind, and you cannot go there with your thought, and you cannot go there with the structures of your mind either. that it is entirely transcendent. And so we have to think part of our human experience, the very basis of it, our ordinary human experience, is that we are separated. There's me here, and there's everything else there, right? Me and other. There are two, or more than two. So our entire conceptual understanding of the world is based on that, these different kinds of turning things into objects, of which I am not that. There's me and the object. And all our language, all our thought, even our thoughts to us are objects, because we can think about them. We're thinking, well, what I'm saying right now, that's pretty stupid. But if we see that everything that we see, everything that we think about, everything that we interact with is an object, we're going to automatically think when someone says the word Brahman, that Brahman is an object. It's not. It's not a thing. It's not a he, she, or it. And yet our mind can't even grasp that. I mean, we can say, and all the Vedantic teachers say that, but unless we have the experience ourselves of consciousness that transcends conceptual thinking, we'll only understand it in terms of the concepts that we know. And so this is why all the language, all the teachings are based in language. And so then we start manipulating in our minds all these kind of rational concepts and things, forgetting that in actuality, that divine consciousness transcends all of it, and yet is the very basis for our consciousness that sees this in a kind of a dual way. So in the Bhagavad Gita, say, for instance, Sri Krishna tells Arjuna, nirdhanto bhava, be without duality, meaning there is no other. So it's a little bit difficult when we get into these scriptures, because then we get hung up in the language. And especially when we get into the philosophical discussions. In the Upanishads, which are the main foundational texts of the Vedanta, at least one of the main ones, there are many stories, and the stories are sometimes better at illustrating these ideas than actual speakers talking philosophy. And they're, say, for instance, the idea that there's only one consciousness. I think I have the numbers here. So in the Pravrajika Upanishad, some of my favorite characters are there, and two of them, one of them is the sage Yajnavalkya. And in this particular story, he is King Janaka, who has invited all the sages of a particular country to come to a sacrifice that he's holding. It's a gift-giving sacrifice. And he wants to know who is the wisest of all these sages. And so what he does is he gets, is it 100 or 1,000? Somebody tell me. I think it's 1,000 cows. And onto the horns of each one, he ties a bag of gold. And he says to the rishis, the wise ones gathered there, revered people, whoever is the wisest amongst you can have the cows. And of course, they're not going to say anything. They're not going. It says the rishi said nothing. That they're not going to get up and say "I," but so almost like canceling themselves right out at that very moment. So they said nothing, and then Yajnavalkya said to the student that he brought with him, "Oh my dear, take him away," meaning the cows. And his student did, and then it said the rishis were angry. And they pretty much basically said, who does he think he is? And the main priest of Janaka got up and said, so, Yajnavalkya, you are the wisest amongst us? And Yajnavalkya says, I salute the wisest, I only want the cows. So then of course, there's going to be a debate to find out if he really deserves those cows. And one after the other, different of the wise people get up and debate him, of which one of the only female rishis in the Upanishads is Gargi, who debates him twice and seems to have rather a senior position amongst those rishis. But she's not the one I'm going to talk about. One of the rishis gets up and says, "So, Yajnavalkya, how many gods are there?" And Yajnavalkya says, "Well, just what it says in the Vedas. There's 333 and 3,033. And the rishi says, "Yes, how many gods are there, Yajnavalkya?" And he says, 33. "Yes, how many gods are there, Yajnavalkya?" 6. And he says, "Yes," and here's important, he's saying yes every time, which in the Sanskrit is Om. And how many gods are there, Yajnavalkya? He says 3. Yes, how many gods are there, Yajnavalkya? He says 2. Yes, how many gods are there, Yajnavalkya? He says 1.5. He says, "Yes, how many gods are there, Yajnavalkya?" And he says, "Only 1." And so this is the real basis of how you can find a jillion gods in the Hindu tradition, and yet they all come down to one infinite, singular reality. Call it God, call it ground of being, call it infinite consciousness, call it Brahman. There's really only one reality, sometimes also called Sat Chit Ananda, which in Sanskrit, certain sounds aren't allowed to live next door to other sounds, and so they have to morph. So Sat Chit Ananda can't be like that. So it becomes Sat Chidananda. And you will find, I'm telling you this because this is another thing about language that one needs to keep in mind. So we're studying Vedanta. We think we might like to take on some translations. And maybe we might like to at Ridgely, we have a Bhagavad Gita class and everyone brings their favorite translation. And some of them are radically different than others, even though the Bhagavad Gita is pretty straightforward Sanskrit. And why is that? And this is interesting to know because for our own purposes, we don't need to worry about, well, this Swami is studying this one. That my idea is that, yes, you might be attending a class that has a particular text being presented, but there are probably other translations of that text. Find the one you love, the one that speaks to you. So, say, for instance, the Bhagavad Gita is a good example. There's, I don't know how many, hundreds of translations by now. And the translator, Sanskrit, is a very ancient language. And it has many, 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 many more words in it than English does. And has picked up words from many other languages over the millennia. And not only that, because it is an old language, it has also picked up many nuances to the same word. And so one verbal root, let's say, can mean 25 different things, including exact opposite things like to be born and to die. And depending on what era it was used and how it's used. So Sanskrit poetry, and even Sanskrit prose, is very, very subtle. And using one word can convey many, many depths of meaning. And so just sticking to the surface meaning is like, yeah, that's fine, but they almost always mean something more. And I think someone told me that a good Sanskrit poet was not considered even a halfway decent poet unless they could render verse on 3 different levels, at least. So the Bhagavad Gita translated into English. Whoever is the translator has to make the choice. Who is going to be the audience? So let's say Swami Pravrajika, who made the choice that he wanted his translation to be beautiful, and he wanted it to be, say for instance, something you could pick up in Barnes and Noble and open it up and look at it, and it's beautiful, beautiful language and easily understood with not a whole lot of extra footnotes and scholarly this and that, right? And that's what it is. It's a beautiful translation. It isn't, however, a word-for-word translation. It's more, he understood the meaning of the verses and put that in there. We have a class called Ask the Sisters, and someone had just quoted a verse. And I was looking in Swami Prabhavananda's Gita for the translation, and I saw it because I know the verse in Sanskrit. Not a word was translated there, but it was a beautiful meaning. The meaning was. So if you love beautiful language and you don't care about the exact word-for-word translation, then there's Swami Prabhavananda's, there's Eknath Ishwaran, there's, I'm trying to think of another one. Those two in particular are coming to my mind. If you want a scholarly translation, then you are going to get kind of not so beautiful language and kind of almost in certain ways dry language with lots of footnotes, but maybe closer to what the Sanskrit actually says in terms of word for word. So those are good for if you already have a good sense of a text, but you want to go deeper. And then there's the ones with the commentaries. And this is where this is what happens with Sanskrit. Because only certain sounds are allowed to live next door to each other, words often are slightly changed, like letters have to be changed so that they can live next to each other. And words are run together in one long run-on line. You might remember, I know young people don't remember this song, but in the old days, like in the 1930s, there used to be that song, mares eat oats and does eat oats and little lambs eat ivy. That's what Sanskrit does. So do you know what I just said? Sure. Mares eat oats and does eat oats and little lambs eat ivy. But it sounds like lambs eat ivy, right? Lambs eat divey. All right, so in the Sanskrit commentary, say they were commentating on lambs eat ivy, one commentator will say, no, it's lambs eat ivy. Another one will say, and so therefore it means lambs eat ivy. And another one will say, no, it's lambseed ivy. See, there's a kind of ivy called lambseed, and that changes the meaning because lambseed is a holy thing that came from 5,000 years ago. And so the whole verse changes the meaning. And another one will say, no, it's lambseed ivy, right? Lambseed ivy. And none of them would be wrong. You know, they're not making it up. They actually can split words like that. And every Sanskrit commentary has to follow a format to be taken seriously. They have to take the word and they have to split it apart, take it out of its sandhi, its joining, and explain why they did it and explain what it means, then make the verse, make a meaning, and then state all the objections of all their opponents and answer all the objections of all their opponents. And so a simple verse can have like 5 pages of commentary. So if you like that kind of thing, if you really like it or want to study one, that's great. But please don't make that one of your basic inspirational readings. That find the one you love. And that goes with Upanishads, because nowadays most Sanskrit texts are translated in some way or another into English or other languages. This is also the basis for becoming really confused in between the different kinds of Vedanta. That we can argue for Shankara's Advaita and claim that Sri Ramakrishna was a Shankara Advaitin. And we can also argue for Vijnanavada, for Vijnana, let's call it Vijnana Vedanta, and claim that Sri Ramakrishna was that. And both people would find a basis in Sri Ramakrishna because he spoke about just every kind of spiritual tradition under the sun and had a genius for making them very simple to understand. So again, a text like the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna is going to be a wonderful and simple commentary on just about every Vedantic tradition. And if you want to claim one way or another, you can find your justification in the Gospel. And if you want to argue with somebody else about it ad nauseum, you can do that too. That some people love to do that. So, and that's part of their spiritual life. Everybody has their own path. That is true at Ridgely too. We have people who are just strongly devotional and they couldn't care less about the philosophy. And we have people that are not going to accept the devotional path really too much, but they love messing around with, thinking through all the different. So what is important is that we make it our own. In other words, try to live our way into the experience. Otherwise, we'll be like parrots. If we're, some people, you give a talk and they raise their hand and say, but Gitaprana, what about? And a long philosophical thing comes out of their mouth. If they do that at Ridgely, we usually say, and what does that mean to you? And they can't say because they've heard it, but they haven't really made it their own. In other words, thought about it and digested it and are not able to put that teaching in their own understanding, which is where the real understanding happens. So you can quote Shankara or the Gita or whatever, but if we haven't really passed it through our own understanding at whatever level, or if there is such a thing as levels, we're at, it's not going to do us much good. So my aunt, who was a little bit of Amrita, knew her, a little bit of an Advaita fanatic, and her friend, who was even more so, and I were in India at the same time when I was I think 1990. And Swami Tapasyananda Ji, who was living in Chennai, is very well known. He's written some wonderful translations and also that great book, Bhakti Schools of Vedanta, which I recommend to everybody. It's not only about the Bhakti schools. In order to explain how they're different from Advaita Vedanta, he explains Advaita as well. But he himself was not an Advaitin. And so he's sitting there and telling my aunt, well, you see, you Advaitins, you're just like parrots. You have no experience of what you're talking about, and yet you go on talking as if you know what you're talking about, and it's just the same as if a parrot's up, and they didn't like that. But he was right. So we don't want to do that with our spiritual life at whatever way that we see it. We want to make it our own. It's so important. Another thing is this, especially when we come to Advaita Vedanta, that we're manipulating concepts speaking. And so we speak of Brahman, and sometimes the pronoun him gets in there, or even it. Or we speak of God as if God is somewhere else, right? And then people seem to feel that, God is somewhere. But the essence of all the Vedanta is that thou art that. Thou art already that divine. Right? So what do we need to add to ourselves? We have to ask. Nothing. That we don't need to add anything because we already are that. So we do need to subtract something, but we don't need to add. And so it's not that God is going to, as a reward, show up. In fact, the divine is showing up every moment, or we would not be conscious. And in every moment, the divine is present. Only this thing that we need to subtract, which is generically called Maya and understood in many different ways, is the thing that we need to minimize through our spiritual practices. This is why we practice, to minimize this idea that I'm just a small, self-centered me, and to understand that that infinite consciousness is our birthright. And Swami Vivekananda used to say, we are like people who have placed their own hands over their own eyes and are crying, "Help, help, it's dark." And he says, just take your hands away. So God, if we're in the tradition of devotion, isn't somewhere else. And not only that, say for instance, if we our deity that we worship is someone who, like an avatar, let's just use Sri Ramakrishna as an example. Do we think that happened 100 years ago and it's all over? And somehow my misfortune is I wasn't born when Sri Ramakrishna was alive. But what if Sri Ramakrishna is alive in every moment? And we just think, 100 years ago, when in actuality, here, right now, and Swami Shraddhananda, who was the head of the Sacramento Center, once said to me in Hollywood, well, when you go into a temple, you have to think that space and time are an illusion, and therefore all the people, holy people that have ever been there in the past, are there or will be there in the future, are present at this exact moment when you go into a holy place. And likewise, I also think, say we're reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, do we actually think this is only meant for the people he was talking to 100 and some odd years ago? Right? And so generically, we're like almost eavesdropping on a conversation that was not meant for us. But in actuality, the divine is always present, and to think in the infinity of things that are and can be and possibilities, that something like the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna is in our hands actually means it is meant exactly for us, right? It's not only for who he happened to be talking to 100 and some odd years ago, that it's in our hands right here, right now. It is Sri Ramakrishna speaking directly to us, not to just somebody. And in the same way, people then, especially studying Vedanta, start to become discouraged. And because usually the idea is we present the teachings in its highest form. And then we might make the mistake, us speakers, of saying, but we are little people, we can't hope to get there. Have you ever heard that? Where is there to get? That I think we're selling everybody down the river. And so if I started recently saying, please, the fact that you're even sitting here at 5 some odd o'clock in a place when there are infinite other things to do on a weekend, or that you're even interested in spiritual life at all, means we've already come 3/4 of the way down the path. Right? It's not like we're standing at the beginning and saying, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to do this? That, of course we are. And we shouldn't ever sell ourselves so far down the path that we become discouraged, which I think is a mistake that often speakers make. That, yes, the ideal is very, very high. And especially if we might be making the mistake of trying to compare ourselves to Sri Ramakrishna with all his amazing sadhana. That ideal is so high but remember, he himself said, if you only do 1/16 of what I did, you will succeed. So I think that we should remember that we're in this paradox of taking a beginner mind and yet thinking the fact that we even care is already 80% of the struggle. And then the last thing in this Maya, people get kind of fixated on how do I get rid of it, and then end up being narcissistic about their spiritual practice, right? That in a Woodstock, which is very close to Ridgely, the main question people ask is, why are all spiritual aspirants so narcissistic? And we can be if we're worried too much about all our negative qualities. And so a lot of the sadhus say 80% of our spiritual practice should be on forging the bond, whether we're Advaitins and saying, I am that, aham brahmasmi, or if we're in the devotional tradition and forging our love of the divine, of God, in one form or another. That should be 80% of our spiritual practice, overriding the app that says that I am a small being in a gigantic universe all by myself. And only 20% of it should be worrying about our ego and what it's tripping us up. That otherwise we do run the risk of becoming a little narcissistic. And if we find ourselves at selfless service, always is a good antidote. The other thing, there's one more thing, and I'm trying to think, and my mind is starting to go blank. Let's see if it's on my notes. In spiritual life, there are like little, the holy company is the third way of understanding. And here again, I think we sell short in the sense that we have sometimes a very narrow idea of what is holy company. And yes, if we have the privilege of keeping the company of those who are actually realized, and I know lots of us have had the privilege of meeting people like that, and there is nothing that substitutes for that. I mean, you can watch any number of YouTube videos. It will not be the same as association, because whatever they may say, something is transferred from person to person that does not transfer online. Or even hearing, say, I'm thinking about Swami Sridharananda's reminiscences about Swami Shantananda, who was one of the few people the Ramakrishna order will say was an enlightened soul. And he gave some reminiscences in St. Louis about his as a young monk, being the personal attendant of Swami Shantananda. And even that translates some of the because he told it so personally. Oh, I was so stupid. Why didn't I? Anyway, like that. Some of that, but it's not the same as being in the presence of. And if we can't, I mean, myself, when I think about my life, I think, oh my gosh, I was so privileged to meet these people and to continue to meet these people. And even I would say, not just people might put it, okay, this is going to mean, say, in the Vedanta Society, the Swamis. But in actuality, I learned as much from groups of devotees in various places than I have from some of the sadhus. That they also don't sell the Sangha short. Don't think, oh, the only person there is the head of the center or whatever. There are people who have been quietly practicing for decades that can offer wisdom and even just their presence. So I have learned from people in Hollywood. I learned a lot from the people who are almost brought up in Vedanta, from the people who are disciples of Swami Ashokananda, and who used to be the head of the San Francisco Center. And so many different people and so much wisdom that if we say, well, I'm only going to listen to such and such a people, we might be cutting off our chance to keep holy company. And of course, the other thing in an organization is then, people start talking about each other and blah, 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 blah. And, never a good idea, because really, the Sangha is equally holy company. And maybe we don't have access to the enlightened, but some of those people that are devotees have known them and can tell stories about them. Some of those people themselves, as I said, have their own wisdom. That one, just telling stories about, I'll give you an example. Remember Jaya and Vijaya? Yeah. So they were disciples of Swami Pravrajika, and they came together after searching around, probably in the 1950s, I would guess. And they had the idea, and it was told to me by Jaya, who was laughing at that time. They had the idea that they would visit these different centers, and they came to the Vedanta Society, and they heard about Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And they thought, okay, we can get this in a weekend, and then moved on to the next place. But when Vijaya told this, like 50 years later practically, she was laughing about it. And she said, and now I don't even care about my own liberation. And that is a wonderful stand for someone who is a bhakta. That it doesn't matter to me if I'm liberated or not, if I can just be at the feet of my beloved. Whatever happens, happens. And that one line that she said meant so much. But if we have a narrow view of what keeping holy company is, then we might miss some of that. So please, again, mind open. And there's so much more wisdom around us than we think. And finally, just remembering that we ourselves are already that. We don't have to win our realization for good karmic brownie points. We won't get it. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, I do not reward, I do not punish. We don't need to worry about our karma at all. Our main focus, I think, should be on opening the app in our mind that sees the divine everywhere. And just pouring that in there. Who cares about our karma? It's inscrutable anyway. Just like Maya is actually inscrutable. Why all this? When all this? We can't answer that question, but these questions are all asked from inside a structure of conceptual thinking. And we're talking about something, again, that is way beyond that. Maybe sometimes having favorite quotes that we remember. The Swamis often have like little quotes they pull out of their pocket and look at it every now and then. Or even on your phone. Since you're going to have a phone, put it on there. What? Yeah, well, not in the temple. And little Mahavakyas, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that, or Tatvamasi, thou art that. The Shaktas have another Mahavakya. This is the only last thing I'll say. And it isn't one of the Vedantic ones. There are 4 Vedantic ones. But the Shaktas have another one. And that is those people who worship the Divine Mother. And theirs comes out of the Devi Mahatmyam, the Chandi, where it's a story of how the Devi takes form in order to fight the demonic forces, right? And so in this particular story, the Devi has taken a form and then created out of herself many other forms to fight one of these Rakshasas' armies, and slays them all until there's only the general left, the main guy. And he says, well, you are not fighting fair. You have all these people and all these Devis, and I have only me. And she says, I am the only one here in this world. Who else is there other than me? Ekaivaham jagat yatra. I am the only one. And that's the Shakta Mahavakya, because the idea there is to see the divine everywhere, only her, everywhere. And so if we have that kind of orientation, then remembering things like that, I am the only one here in this world. And maybe just as a last for the people who are not severely Advaitin, some people feel like, well, I can only, in fact, lots of questions, well, should I I can only ask for what would you say, unworldly things from the divine, but seeing as how the divine is present in us and outside of us in every moment, why not just talk to the divine at any given moment? Anything. If Sri Ramakrishna says, nearer than our nearest, dearer than our dearest, then why not talk continuously to the divine, no matter how silly it may seem? Because we are that. In actuality, we are that divine playing at being us. And so to make it more real, just, yes, ask for mukti or liberation or prayers. But why not say for instance, July 4, just before I came here, the Vedanta Society, Swami Sarvapriyananda Center, has a big program at Ridgely. And the night before, there was a severe thunderstorm, knocked out the power to the whole village. And I'm thinking, okay, well, they'll turn it on but at 4 o'clock in the morning, it's still not on. And the power company said won't be on till 8 o'clock on July 4, 8 p.m. And I'm thinking, okay, 100 and some odd people here with no power. So I kind of walked in the shrine and said, it's not funny. And walked out again. That there's no reason why we can't forge just a regular, because it leads us deeper and deeper and deeper. So my time is up. Thanks for listening. Let's chant the end. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Jai Ma.
Thank you very much. I bet you a lot of people are going to be sorry they missed this. Now we have just a couple announcements. We'll have Archie and then come down to the convent for the potluck. And tomorrow, we've had the foundations of Vedanta. Tomorrow we're going to have Hinduism for Dummies by Swami Vivekananda.
Uh-oh.
She speaks from experience. But please, right after Vespers, sit for a few minutes if you want to digest some of this, and then come down to the convent, and we'll have a potluck. Thank you so very much.